Story 1. Back in the 19th century, one of my ancestors was described as a failed horse thief. He was executed after his first attempt. Story 2. A family member had a serious heart condition and needed bypass surgery. They were diagnosed with treatable cancer. Cardiology would not operate until the cancer was treated. Oncology would not treat the cancer because of the heart condition. Despite fighting for treatment for over a year, they allowed him to die. Story 3. Not my immediate family, but a distant uncle once tried to kill a hornet nest with a can of hairspray and a cigarette lighter. It worked until the flaming nest dropped onto a pile of dry leaves next to his shed, which caught fire. He ran in to save his riding mower, but smoke inhalation got him before he made it back out. We now refer to this as the Great Mower Rescue of 1993 at family gatherings. Story 4. I will go first. My uncle was diagnosed with brain cancer in his 40s. He received chemotherapy and had surgeries, and they had finally gotten it under control. The tumor was shrinking. His older brother, who believed in conspiracy theories, convinced him that if he took these $500 vitamins, he would be cured with no side effects. He followed this advice and stopped chemotherapy entirely. He was fine for a month or two, but then one day he lost consciousness and was taken to hospice. The tumors had spread everywhere. One was compressing his trachea, and the one in his brain grew, which essentially left him vegetative. He died within a week of arriving at hospice. The conspiracy theorist uncle bought even more $500 vitamins and was force-feeding them to him while he was in hospice. Story 5. Uncle went to the hospital with symptoms of a severe heart attack. The doctor said that was impossible because my uncle was only 35 and sent him home. He died that night of the severe heart attack. Story 6. Not family, but my best friend since I was 14. He died from taking too much Imodium, the over-the-counter medication for diarrhea. Story 7. My mother, grandmother, and uncle died horrible deaths because of complications from diabetes. They were the type of people who would look at doctors and tell them they did not know what they were talking about. I have outlived my mother and my uncle. Story 8. The great uncle I am named after died in South Africa, being eaten by sharks while surfing. It is also one of my go-to stories when playing two truths and a lie during ice-breaking and team-building exercises at work. Story 9. I am in Finland. My wife's great-great-uncle was influenced by Soviet propaganda in the 1930s and moved to the Soviet Union to help build communism. He was quickly apprehended by the authorities, sentenced to death for being a foreign spy, and is now buried in a mass grave. Story 10. My sister died of an overdose. We begged her to stop, but she did not. She had a 1-year-old son when she died. I love her and miss her all the time, but that was very unwise in my opinion. Story 11. This was a girl in the community. She and her friends were drinking on train tracks. A train came. Everyone else got off the tracks. Instead, she decided to try to outrun the train. She did not outrun it. The paramedics needed post-traumatic stress disorder treatment after that. Story 12. I had a cousin with endometriosis who needed a hysterectomy, but they would not operate because her future husband might want children one day. She was only 15. Story 13. Addiction. Almost everyone in my family has died from some kind of addiction. Drugs, alcohol, smoking. This is despite the fact that they had numerous health scares, were told to quit, and had friends die around them all the time from accidents and health problems. Story 14. My great-grandfather was a smoker. My great-grandmother died from lung cancer due to secondhand smoke. He was on oxygen because of complications from smoking. He still smoked, fell asleep while smoking, and died in a house fire. Story 15. My mom's boyfriend died a few years ago. He couldn't drive because he got a driving under the influence charge. A few months earlier, he had a widowmaker heart attack that he barely survived. A few weeks before, he was diagnosed with bone cancer. None of that killed him. What did was him celebrating my mom saying she would leave with him to his home state. He had drunk a good amount on that stormy night, decided he didn't have enough, and drunkenly rode his bike to the liquor store. He never made it. On the way, he fell off his bike, and a driver couldn't see him because of the rain. The driver ran right over his head. Story 16. My cousin was working on his car when it slipped off its jack and crushed him. He was in the backyard. His mother found him when she called him in for lunch, and he did not answer. He was 19 years old. He had a girlfriend and a large group of friends. Watching those kids bury their friend was haunting. Story 17. I am a bit vague on the details because I was young. My uncle had arm pain and major signs of heart disease. He frequently went to the doctor asking for an angiogram and to be checked for it. They kept saying he was fine. One day, he felt bad enough to visit the doctor. After the doctor said he was fine and left the room for the next patient, my uncle had a heart attack and died on the table. My aunt won a large settlement for malpractice. Story 18. This is hard to talk about, but my cousin, who was in his 20s, had been drinking with friends. They had a game of hitting each other as hard as possible, starting with the arms. I don't know why he volunteered to let one of his friends hit him in the chest. His friend actually did it with full force. My cousin said he was okay, and they all went to sleep afterward. He never woke up. It was terrible and frustrating. Yes, it was foolish, to say the least. Story 19. I had a cousin who had one leg. One night, he drove his car without his prosthetic leg. When he got home, he pulled up in his driveway. He thought he put the car in park, but instead, he put it in neutral. He got out of the car and fell down when the car started to roll backward. The car then ran over him and killed him. Story 20. My brother's father died of a heroin and fentanyl overdose. My brother, never really able to live on his own or take responsibility, died by fentanyl overdose a few days later. His friend, a bounty hunter, promised to find a responsible party. I thought, there is a dealer somewhere, but my brother is the one putting those substances into his veins. Story 21. My father died of a stroke at age 65. His only social security check was clawed back. He was smoking 3 packs of Salem cigarettes a day. Story 22. I have one distant cousin who was run over by a coal cart and a distant uncle who was run over by a train. Story 23. A distant cousin was run over by a car some decades ago. The family story is that he looked to his left, saw no cars coming, and began crossing. He had recently arrived in Australia for vacation, forgot about the difference in roadways, and was promptly hit by a car approaching from his right. Story 24. We were poor, and when I was born, my great-grandmother hung herself and left a suicide note stating, "I needed to make space for the newborn." Story 25. My grandfather, who I never got to meet, survived being a fighter pilot in World War II and died because of cigarettes. My father was the youngest in a very large family. His mother was born in the 1920s. The things I wish I had thought to ask her before she died. Story 26. My grandmother's brother was kicked in the testicles by a horse in the 1930s. They were Christian Scientists, and he died an excruciating death over a few days, praying it would heal itself and did not seek medical treatment as per their religion. Story 27. She caught on fire and burned to death because she was cooking on a stove while wearing a flowy dress. We have more foolish survivors in the family. Story 28. I had a cousin who was hit by a train. He and another man were in a pickup truck trying to race across the tracks before the train arrived. The train won. Story 29. Fell off a bicycle. For months later, died of a blood clot in the brain. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Miss you every day. Story 30. Not someone in my family or even a close friend, but someone I vaguely knew a few years ago when I was part of a psychedelic drug group. This group had a game where, typically after a night of drinking, taking various drugs, and partying, they would go out in front of their main party house, located on a major street, around 6 or 7 in the morning when traffic was starting again. They would all get in the street and crab walk backward when they saw a car coming, and whoever jumped out of the way last one. I will note that while I was somewhat involved with drugs back then, I was only loosely affiliated with this group, and I never stayed late enough to really witness or participate in this activity, but I heard a lot about it. This guy was well known as one of the champions of the game. One Saturday, he jumped late, and the driver somehow did not see the 4 or 5 young adults crab walking in the middle of the road. He got clipped by the car and ended up breaking his leg badly. That is not the actual story, though. It was around the time I was starting to get my life together and distancing myself from them. Most of the following I know from talking to others involved. The real story came a few months later, literally the day this guy got his cast off. He announced he wanted to play the game again and planned to beat everyone. The group got together and got absolutely plastered, as you can imagine, since these people had serious substance abuse issues. Then they went out to play the game again. Typically, these parties happen on weekends, so while the road is busy at 6 or 7 in the morning, it is not too busy. The location is a long straight stretch, so most of the time the activity ended with an angry driver who saw the group playing chicken from a distance and stopped well before hitting them. I point this out because there were two key differences this time. First, it was a Thursday night going into Friday morning around 7, when people were getting up and starting their commute to work. Second, that morning was uncharacteristically foggy, making visibility very poor, even along the straight road. They played a couple of rounds and everything was going well, or as well as a bunch of intoxicated people throwing themselves at moving vehicles can go, until this guy decided it was not daring enough. He wanted to go up the road a few blocks to a curve. Most others did not want to but followed him. In the fog, nobody could see around the curve, and a car slammed into him going over 10 miles per hour above the speed limit. He died from the impact. Flinging yourself at moving vehicles was the most foolish way I have heard of anyone dying. It was a news story for a while. A young college student killed by a driver sold newspapers, especially because his parents later started an organization to promote safe driving and reduce speeding. Story 31. Run over by a teacher in a school zone. The teacher was running late for class. They came to the funeral and were very apologetic. We did not press charges. This was a few generations ago. Story 32. My dad decided the best way to die was to go swimming in a pool and inhale some paint fumes while he was there. He was not found for 7 days. Story 33. Got stage 4 cancer, was declared cancer-free about a year later, died of heart complications from the immunotherapy. Story 34. The doctor accidentally punctured one of my dad's main arteries during an angioplasty. They did not realize the injury at the time. They sewed him up and called my mom to say the procedure was successful. About an hour later, they called back to inform us that he had died, and they did not know why. It was not until the autopsy that we learned he had died from internal bleeding. My dad was in his 40s and we were still young children. Saying it was an accident would be an understatement. Story 35. I was told many times to slow down and focus on chewing thoroughly before swallowing safely. A family member died by choking on a piece of French toast drenched in syrup while talking on the phone. Story 36. All right, I have 2 stories. A cousin drank himself to death in the middle of his police misconduct trial. This made front-page news. A relative-in-law was shot with rubber bullets off a highway overpass after the police cornered him. The chase began following a methamphetamine laboratory explosion. The traffic report covered this incident. Story 37. I had an aunt who got breast cancer. She caught it early, and it was very treatable. However, she spoke to her pastor before speaking to my uncle, and the pastor advised her to pray the cancer away, saying God will heal you if you have faith. No one even knew she had cancer until she was in the hospital dying. Story 38. I had a great uncle who was sitting down to dinner when his wife told him he was holding his fork incorrectly. He set it down, got up, and walked out of the dining room. He came back with a gun, walked through the dining room to the backyard, and took his own life. It was very tragic. Story 39. My cousin walked across an interstate at 3 a.m. It was a very sparsely populated area with nothing around except a casino and a love station. He was hit by the only car that had passed through that area in the last 20 minutes. The car had its lights on and was not speeding. He was extremely high on methamphetamine. Nobody in my family had spoken to him in several months, and we did not know he had died for over a week. He had no identification or wallet on him, no phone, nothing that could provide information about who he was. Story 40. 3 times great-grandfather was putting a shoe on his horse when his daughter called out to him. He looked up, and the horse kicked him in the chest. He died instantly at the age of 92. Story 41. Lung cancer from being a lifelong smoker and having watched his father die from it for the same reason. Story 42. It was not my family, but I was there and am still traumatized. I was at a party on the third floor of an apartment building. There was a couple there, Bob and Anna, in their early 30s. Anna was tired and decided to go home early. Bob decided to stay. After Anna left, Bob got very drunk and hooked up with a colleague, Beth. They locked themselves in the master bedroom. Anna came back because she forgot something. Bob received a message from a friend at the party warning him that Anna was looking for him in the living room. He thought the best thing to do was jump from the balcony of the master bedroom to the balcony of the living room and walk into the party as if nothing had happened. Beth could then leave the room innocently. However, Bob was very drunk when he jumped. It did not seem that far, but he missed and fell and he died. Story 43. A distant relative a very long time ago was the brother of my direct ancestor. The brothers came to America as Puritans. The brother who was not my direct ancestor was living in Salem during the witch trials. He had a son who moved to Virginia and married the daughter of a well-respected governor of Rhode Island named Benedict Arnold. This was the ancestor of the Benedict Arnold who later sullied the name. The son who married that daughter apparently became insane, and in his madness, he killed his wife. They hanged him for that. Story 44. Not my family, but my former boyfriends. That person and their spouse were on vacation. He tried to take a photo, made a few steps back, and fell off a cliff. I wish I were joking. Story 45. My great-grandfather was run over by a truck at an Armistice Day parade in 1918. He survived multiple trips across the Atlantic, worked in a mill, and endured an entire war, but the mean streets of Ohio took him out. Story 46. My grandmother's cousin was playing with a friend outside at 6 years old. He ran in front of a bakery truck chasing a ball into the street. His mother had left him home alone, so the fault obviously lies with her. This was in 1939, so the generation raising small children was not taught to look both ways before crossing a street, since cars constantly coming down streets was not common when they were kids. My aunt was driving home from work. A high school student was driving with a friend to a sports game, blew through a two-way intersection, and hit her. The student sped through a stop sign well above the speed limit. My aunt was ejected from the car and killed by a head injury. She was fanatical about wearing a seatbelt and knew that all it takes is one time of not wearing one. But she wasn't wearing one that time. My mother speculated it was so she wouldn't mess up her outfit. She was extremely overweight, over 500 pounds, so it is conceivable that the seatbelt failed. Not a Darwin Award death, but still preventable, tragic, and pointless. The driver never faced any criminal or traffic charges for what happened. Story 47. Getting a bruised big toe, then refusing to go to the doctor until the next routine appointment 3 weeks away with the diabetes nurse. Gangrene in the toe, gangrene in the leg, amputated leg, death. Story 48. A great-uncle was about 18 when he got a job as a ditch digger. This was before the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and job safety regulations. This was no roadside ditch. It was an irrigation canal in central Idaho. There were no retaining walls or any safety measures. He was down there with a shovel, digging away when a massive rainstorm hit. The dirt turned to mud, and the trench started to fill with water. The boss shouted at him to get out. His last words were, "I'm almost done, boss." Then the trench collapsed. They recovered him and reburied him where people are supposed to be buried a few days later. Story 49. Great-grandmother, who was over 100 years old, was sitting on the terrace mumbling something. She said, "I don't have the energy for this anymore," got up, and threw herself into an old well in her yard, in front of our family members. I do not know if it is foolish or not, but I cannot blame her. Everything around her changed. She did not understand anything, and simply said goodbye. Story 50. Addiction and murder by a spouse are serious issues. My grandmother was 20 years old and on her way to visit my father, who was 2 years old and in the hospital, when she was hit by a drunk driver in a semi-truck. Story 51. My dad came to India after 15 years of being in the United States. Before he acclimatized to the weather, he took a nap under a tree in 40-degree weather during the summer heat. Heat stroke affected him. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.